This is the Software and Technology Podcast, your B2B show for the best thought leadership in the industry, bringing you information, education, and inspiration. Only on Market Scale.
The more diversity of thought of the people working at tech companies, the better.
The blockchain idea was around 91. The same idea of, in the digital world, we need verifiable documents.
Hello and welcome to the podcast today, everyone. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thank you so much for joining me. Today's podcast focuses on the ever-changing world of IT and how to navigate the evolutions that have occurred in recent times. And joining me for this conversation today is Jason Carolan. He is the Chief Innovation Officer for Flexential. Jason, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Tyler. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, like I mentioned, this has been a rapidly evolving space right now. And one of the areas that we've really seen grow in importance over recent years, and then especially recent months, has been the importance of network, right? So talk to me a little bit more about the importance of network and how you've seen it increased recently.
Well, I know certainly in my own life, the importance of my last mile connection to the cable company is strained, I think, every single day as I compete with my kids and my family to actually get work done. But the network has become sort of a very crucial platform during this time. When we think about how we've been able to, whether it's food delivery or either, ordering food, whether it's getting groceries, whether it's, getting our prescriptions refilled and so forth, we've just really navigated to, the platform that's really powered by the network, as something that has kind of saved us during this time. And I think, frankly, just accelerates a lot of change in the future and how much we kind of count on this being, readily available and highly available. It's an area like 5G really helps is by providing, different types of connectivity that can support, network-centric use cases, which I think are really at the heart of anything that we're doing in the future.
Absolutely. And just from my perspective, and as I said, you can correct me if you think that this is an incorrect statement, but it feels like one of the enduring lessons for businesses that have come out of this pandemic has been the importance of agility and adaptability, right? So what kind of tools have you seen come available when it comes to IT that have really helped businesses adapt to the current climate and what they've had to work through as we sit here during the era of COVID-19?
Well, the first big shift that I think occurred for probably everybody in March was really, at least in the United States, was a shift from, going to an office to remote, right, and to being home. We just had our customer advisory council a couple of weeks ago and asked, some of our top clients, very similar questions. And, just there are some very basic things like, do you have a good chair? Do you actually have more than one monitor, or do you have any monitors at all at home? So there's the physical aspect of that accommodation and being able to have the employee experience kind of top of mind so that they can actually be productive in these remote scenarios. The second is really goes back to the network, which, having access to VPNs, having access to your technology, laptops, et cetera, all became very critical during this time, and had some customers do very rapid expansions with their VPN platforms and things like Global Protect from Palo Alto and others that could help scale, kind of this rapid shift from an office location with really great, circuits and dedicated networking to really remote and home. I think the agility part of this is really huge, just as we continue to adopt and adapt, the ability to change. There was a great story about the New York, public school system, which you think about the density of New York and being able to educate, students, which is, required by law to provide an education. And, they actually had to ship out Verizon MiFis to all their students. They were locked down only to the school network and locked down to applications supported by the school and learning management system. But it became a way for them to provide, network connectivity and very remote, or in this case, very high density and just not great network connectivity.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about next generation technologies and the impact that they have had during this time, whether it's co-location or interconnection or hybrid cloud and edge computing strategies. Kind of talk me through those next generation technologies and what they've been able to provide for businesses during this time.
Flexential is a data center platform that has been networked together to provide interconnect between all of our facilities, as well as the largest networks on the planet, peering locations, carrier, hotels, cloud connectivity, and really provides a network fabric that allows, customers to sort of take the network and make it a competitive advantage. We also provide cloud services and professional services on top of that infrastructure so that customers can kind of pivot between, their needs in co-location, which often are driven by demands in a location, and I'll come back to that in just a second, to cloud, which, cloud traditionally has been a little bit more centralized. You think about Amazon and Microsoft, they typically run their cloud platforms in a few locations across the country. And so latency kind of is the speed of light, right? Which, my joke is that Stephen Hawking's, unfortunately passed away, I think a couple of years ago, but didn't solve speed of light. So we're still garnered by speed of light, as an issue in applications. Mm-hmm. And, as we get more devices on the network, as we get more content that we're generating ourselves. And I think there was a statistic where YouTube, today, it was probably about a year ago, there's about 300 hours of content generated every minute on top of the YouTube platform. So if you go do the math of that and you just think about how much video content that is, and that's just YouTube. Now take, Facebook, Periscope, Twitter, all the other, TikTok, et cetera. And you just think about how much data that we're creating. Now, some of that data is throwaway, right? It's for entertainment value, even though there seems to be a lot of people making millions of dollars off their YouTube channels. But, that isn't necessarily business critical data. What is business critical data is things like, video and telemetry and LiDAR to make sure that your manufacturing floor is safe and secure. Or maybe it's making sure that your campus, that you have school or that you've got a sporting event is safe and secure. Or your railway platform flying across the country and you've got positive train control and all these regulations to make sure that your train platform is following the right safety rules, but also being able to do some real-time monitoring to make sure, if that poor cow that's on the railway track, a mile ahead, that's something that you can detect very, very quickly and get that data back to the train, but also get that data outside the train. These are applications that are very latency sensitive. So when you think about things that are moving or things that are sort of, closely tied in together to the location and where that data is being consumed and that positive control, you don't want that positive control to take, seconds for you to get that feedback. That feedback has to be within sub millisecond feedback to be able to stop, activities so you can prevent, safety issues. And I think that's really a great use case of looking at latency and why edge plays such a really important part on changing the dynamics of the platform. So instead of having all these centralized cloud platforms and these data centers that are in relatively few locations, the edge will be in millions of locations that allow us to consume services, quite differently than we consume today, but also, start to count on them even more. Autonomous vehicles is another great example of this, probably used, maybe too often, because I know for a fact that car isn't going to make a call over the network to figure out whether it needs to stop or not. It's something that has to be embedded in the car itself. But the network plays a huge role in keeping the car's software up to date, understanding, farther down the road what's happening in a mapping condition or a street condition, and then also communicating between vehicles to get a better sense of what is happening on the street. Those systems all have to work together to be able to give you, that self-driving experience, because otherwise it just wouldn't be safe to go do it. And that's really what edge kind of powers.
So what have been some successful use cases where you've seen solutions deployed in a way that have been extremely effective during this time, be it, increased use of new video chat tools or things along those lines? Have you seen some successful use cases, particularly, healthcare or something along those lines?
Yeah, we've definitely have. We've got a couple of customers that I've spoken to recently. One's a CEO of a mental health, a bunch of mental health clinics. And his comments were, look, I've actually been able to see all my patients in the last couple of months rather than them getting stuck in traffic or trying to find a parking spot, because of really the ability to use telehealth. And I think it will just become very common for us to use that as just our day-to-day technology. I know for my own family, we're getting very used to it. It's like, well, why would I spend time at the doctor office if I don't need to? We have another customer that went from about 70 to 100 sessions in a month and they're a large, cancer center here in the United States. And, now they're doing over 4,000 a month in telehealth visits. So I really think it's a way to, one, certainly reduces cost structure in, hospital systems and care, which I think is an important area. And then I think, two, it just becomes, more efficient that we can be able to pull specialists in, very dynamically and get, expertise that, typically would have been, something that had to be scheduled far in advance. I think it just makes it much more dynamic. And then you kind of add to that this growing idea of the Internet of Things, right? Having more smart devices that can do, more data collection at the home or at the person, thinking about kind of the Apple Watch and the next generation of that, the current generation can already, kind of tell you whether you're having a heart attack or not. Being able to extend that, to even, more data like temperature and things like that will really give us a rich kind of tapestry of data that can be constantly collected and frankly intertwines with this telehealth platform and becomes something that we just didn't have really in the past, which was kind of constant monitoring of what's going on.
Yeah, you've mentioned 5G and IoT just throughout the course of this conversation. I'm curious what role you see 5G and IoT playing moving forward. How much more robust can those tools really be to aid in connectivity and in creating these robust solutions like what you're mentioning?
Yeah, I think that the industry has a tendency to focus a lot on speed, right, on 5G. Which is, I think is great and certainly an enabler for a lot of different experiences, like, spending some time on sports and entertainment. That's an industry that has been trying to figure out how do we get more fans engaged. And, certainly now with games being, done kind of in isolation, that fan experience becomes, really critical. At the stadium or the ball field, it becomes very critical to have the network because that fan experience is sort of going from live what's going on the field to the announcer that's, in the field of play to the screens that are in the field to something that is now intertwined into your mobile device. But without something like 5G, your mobile device can't really be part of that program just because the latency of the old cellular network is roughly 40 to 50 milliseconds of time versus the new 5G network is about 5 milliseconds. So it really radically changes the ability to kind of tie real-time data into the device, into the field of play, which I think creates a very dynamic fan experience. That's one use case for 5G. And I think, the other great thing about 5G is that it does support just a lot more devices. And that's kind of a factor of the way the radio technology works, but also because there are more towers out there supporting 5G and supporting the fiber rollouts. So that number of devices that it can support, it becomes radically important when thinking about IoT and how many, smart devices or simple sensors can be deployed, register themselves to the network and really provide kind of this always on data access that, can tell you, really just about anything, whether you're, a farmer in the middle of, Iowa or Minnesota trying to understand the weather conditions, within this small segment of your farm, that data has to go somewhere. But that data now collected kind of always on gives you this sort of, rich set of resources that you can start to make some real-time decisions. And then along comes, machine learning, right? Which we didn't really, while it's been something we've talked about for 30 years, hasn't really been in the mainstream. Neural networks have existed for 30 years, but, again, the horsepower of the compute hardware, the GPUs, just really hasn't been there for it to make sense. And for it to be as robust. Now we have all the horsepower we need to sort of take all that data, start to train it and discover it with machine learning and AI apps. And now, can really generate some new business models and really change the way that, we consume that technology.
So as we talk about these types of solutions, I think one of the primary concerns is going to be security, right? So how can you help speak to those concerns and maybe ease concerns for people that are going to be concerned about security? Like when we talk about healthcare applications, there's HIPAA to take into account, right? And so there's always going to be those concerns around data and things like that. So how can you speak to those concerns?
First of all, there's, security isn't perfect and never will be, right? It's sort of why the industry calls it either defense in depth, or I used to call it the security onion. You kind of just keep peeling away at it. And you hope to have these multiple sort of reinforcing technologies and processes and governance and things like that can come to play to make it secure, or to help make it secure. The 5G network itself is built on, very high security standards, FedRAMP level, federal, FISMA level requirements versus, you think about the Wi-Fi network. The Wi-Fi network, which is sort of gearing up to kind of, shift into Wi-Fi 6. Wi-Fi 6 has a bunch more new security standards related to it. But, Wi-Fi is still relatively insecure. It's why most companies for their business work require you to be connected to a VPN because it provides, an additional layer of encryption on top of that. The good thing with the 5G network is it's sort of that is built into it, right? And so that security model isn't as concerning. That doesn't mean that devices don't still have to be secure and that applications have to be secure. When it comes to HIPAA, it'd be great that we could actually, just like our ATM cards or just like our credit cards, if we could have sort of full control of our health record and know who's using it and know what's going on. And I think we'll eventually get there because, really we should have to approve or authorize, really people to go get that information kind of within our own control. Today, there are just a lot of different standards and proprietary standards in the way medical records and health data is stored. A good thing we do have HIPAA that I think provides some ability to keep the ownership of it, sort of contained. But, frankly, we don't have a lot of visibility into sometimes how that data is being used, which, can be a little scary.
Right. For
the most part, larger companies and how they use that data for research and things like that, they're anonymizing the data. So it's not tied back to the individual. But, definitely an area of concern. And I think, frankly, plays in a little bit to when we've got IoT and kind of our health data and our health data collection a little bit more distributed. It's an area that we've got to make sure that we're taking a look at.
It feels like things have been in such a rapid state of flux. And you mentioned that example of telehealth visits and how they've really exploded. And especially, you mentioned the example of your family where it's made so much sense and it's worked so well that it's hard to imagine going back to the previous way of doing things. And you can see the benefits of that. You can see the benefits of telehealth, be it, not having to leave your house, not having to sit in a waiting room with potentially other sick people, things like that.
Right.
That's a solution that seems to make a lot of sense. And you can really see that enduring beyond just this pandemic time. What other changes and evolutions do you see that you think this makes sense moving forward, regardless of if we're in a pandemic or not?
Well, the other, kind of area that at least we were, watching sort of within our own company dynamics and how our customers were using our platforms, but also, just looking at the industry is cloud, right? So, we've kind of gone from, this idea of cloud first, say 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, where you didn't get fired if you were using Amazon, to something that is becoming, I think, a little bit more cloud smart, just as people have gotten used to what are the good things about public cloud? What are the bad things about public cloud? And certainly the acceleration of cloud usage over the course of the last few months is very understandable because, people needed more capacity and they needed capacity in areas that they couldn't predict. Zoom is a great example of, what I think they went from 5 million sessions a day to 200 million sessions a day. There's no way you could do that with traditional infrastructure. You had to be on cloud to be able to power that. Now with, let's just say Zoom settles into 100 million sessions a day is kind of their new run rate. Well, they don't need all that gear that they had for 200. Now they only need 100. So being able to right size is really important. And I think that's an area that we see a lot of our customers still wanting a lot of help in, which is like, look, how can I right size my cloud environment to make sure that the costs aren't getting out of control, or making sure that I don't introduce a security issue, and sort of mixing the co-location, the private cloud capabilities and public cloud together, which is really what the definition of hybrid would be. So I think, really the if anything, during this time, we've kind of gotten used to having massive resources kind of at our fingertips, kind of an API call away, but also, making sure that we can do that safely and securely, is as critical today as it ever has been.
As we start to wrap up, Jason, what should companies be considering when developing a network strategy over the next 1 to 2 years or so? Just maybe as they consider what has been taking place, where should they start when it comes to developing what that network strategy should be moving forward? What kinds of things should they be considering? What factors should they take into account?
Great question. I think the Achilles heel of the network, unfortunately, is the last mile. For any of you at home, that have dealt with issues with cable or DSL or whatever, life kind of stops when the network isn't functioning.
Right.
And so I think whether it's an office, whether it's assuming that you're going to be in this mixed mode structure where you've got employees that are working from home and working from the office probably for the next couple of years. I'm not entirely sure whether we ever get back to normal with everybody kind of having a seat at an office. I think that last mile connectivity is hugely important, and I would be looking at is 5G site to site something that you can use in your office to add some redundancy. I would look at 5G and LTE and kind of having a backup plan. And there's a lot of great routing technologies and SD-WAN platforms out there today that can take advantage of both cellular data and landline data. Just making sure that you've got in your BCP, your business continuity plan, and that you've sort of taken the steps to make sure that you've got the best network you can have, because I think ultimately the services that you're counting on every single day are consumed over that network. It's something that we do every day for customers that are in our data centers. Is we manage that network 24/7. We shift carriers when we see an issue with one carrier or another. But that's just not possible when you're at home or a branch office that doesn't have as much robustness built in. So I definitely would be looking at how can I use 5G kind of to my advantage here as it continues to roll out.
Absolutely. Jason Carolan, Chief Innovation Officer for Flexential. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise in this world of IT as things are rapidly changing and evolving, and as the rate of adoption for these technologies has certainly accelerated during this time. So Jason, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast today.
Thanks, Tyler. Definitely exciting times for sure.
Absolutely. And thank you everybody for joining us here on the podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed bringing this podcast episode to you. Of course, make sure you subscribe to get more episodes just like this, and you can also go back and listen to previous episodes of the podcast right here as well. We will be back soon with more episodes of the podcast, but until then, I've been your host today, Tyler Kern. Thanks for listening.